I grew up in the UK and went through the standard public school system, and then I did 2 years at college. For various reasons, one being that the millennial generation was getting screwed over with £10,000 fees for attending universities, I didn't further my education and went straight into work. For a long time, and this started when I was in high school if I remember correctly, I had this feeling, this sentiment, that this system I was in, this bubble that I felt locked in, was not actually making me more clever. I was being educated, sure, in the sense that I was gaining surface level knowledge of a variety of subjects. Okay, so the name of the game may have been to provide students with knowledge of different things so they could pursue further knowledge and careers in those fields, but I still thought to myself, does the entire process really need to be around 12 years? School is also quite a daunting experience. So much information overload, knowledge is made mundane and boring. You are removed from your families to such an extent that your friends and teachers might have a better grasp of your character and personality than your own parents. School takes up so much time of your life, and then it even invades your home with homework and coursework. And there's other things too, loads of murky, simmering thoughts of discontentment about school that was swimming in my head. Like for example, now I'm not saying education makes you stupid, but the more I interacted with people higher up the ladder, people who had gone to college and university, the more I began to bizarrely find that their capacity for critical thinking was woefully inept compared to many I knew who weren't that educated. It's almost like the higher they went in education, the more narrow their thinking became, and their ability to think outside the box diminished with each passing year. It's a sweeping generalization, of course, and untrue in many cases, but the point I'm making here is that I am not a man who believes the education system in my country is the apex of standardized schooling. This was a sentiment which had fuel added to its fire when I researched other methods of education throughout the world and throughout history, discovering numerous prominent intellectual figures, such as entrepreneurs like Bill Gates, United States presidents like Benjamin Franklin, or civil rights campaigners like Malcolm X, either did not have formal educations or had a very minimal amount of it, instead educating themselves. The intention for schooling seems to have changed also. Knowledge is a treasure as a commodity. It should be learned to gain answers about our world and the universe, to better ourselves and to better others, to pique and to amplify our curiosity. But the education system is so built into the job market in the sense that, for example, you could be the absolute right man for the job you've applied for, but because your CV lacks certain qualifications, the employers won't even look at it. How many times have we been told by our parents that you need to do good in school, you need to try hard? But what's the reason always given? To get a good job. So knowledge has been linked to money. It's been driven into us from a young age that this is why we should be chasing the golden nuggets of education, to get a comfy job where the cash comes rolling in. And speaking about nuggets of information, the education itself, at least in my experience, is very poor. In GCSE level history, for example, we learnt a bit about the Romans and a bit about World War II and the Holocaust. But for someone studying in Great Britain, why have I never been taught about the British Empire? Why do we know so little about World War I, of which Britain took part in? Why is there so much focus on battles in World War II and how charismatic Winston Churchill looked with a cigar, and not a study on the build-up to the war, and how the Nazis gained power and how the public perception of Jews in Germany evolved? And when you yourself find the answer to these things, you see why you weren't taught, because so much of the knowledge casts the country in a horrible light. There's so much that high schoolers and college kids need to learn about recent history, about standard societal procedures like getting a mortgage or paying taxes, cyber safety, recognizing fake news and being able to analyze news outlets critically, and loads of other stuff. But what new kind of classes are being taught in my country? A class on gay and transsexual relationships, and not even at high school level, but primary school. That leads me to a tangent focusing on a more dangerous aspect of schooling that is compulsory, in that You can be taught many things which are downright lies and half-truths to shape your thinking in a certain way, and you can't even legally get out of it. Another example I might give is when I was learning French, something which I was terrible at. One of my main examinations was to recite a few paragraphs that we had memorized. But I couldn't stop thinking, this isn't a French test. This isn't a measure of how much of the language I know. This is a memory test. I'll throw you one more example. At college, one of the subjects I did was physical education, which was a lot more harder than it sounds. There's so much involved. History of sport, politics and society, sports psychology, sports science. It was so hard. There was so much to memorize. But my teacher told us something that I utilized in the exam, which was that you could not be marked down for the wrong answer. The examiner would just ignore it. So of course, when there was a question asking me to name two things, I went to town and covered the page with answers. And guess what? I got full marks in the exam. The first student, apparently, in the history of that college to do so. I had teachers coming up to me, shaking my hand. They thought I was some kind of genius, when in reality, I had gamed the exam thanks to my teacher's information which not everyone who took the exam knew. So, was that test that I did, the result of that test, really a measure of my intelligence and my knowledge of those topics that were chosen in the test? There's loads of other issues I had, but not really being able to articulate them at the time. And then many years later, I discovered this book called Dumbing Us Down, The Hidden Curriculum of Compulsive Education by John Gatto, who was a teacher for 30 years and won a New York State Best Teacher of the Year award. This book was proof to me that there were others who thought like me, that I wasn't going crazy. It clicked with me so hard, and so many problems and objections to compulsory schooling, many of which I've just mentioned, are raised in this book. Gatto delves deep into the education system and comes to the conclusion that it sadly is only fit and purposely engineered to produce simpletons who follow orders like cogs in an industrial machine. He looks at schooling from a number of interesting angles, some surprising, such as the pseudo-relationships that classmates develop, the inadequacies of grouping students by age group and levels assigned to them, among numerous topics tackled. The book is essentially a series of essays and speeches by Gatto, and the result is a radical treatise that has been a bestseller for 10 years. Gatto attacks the schooling system without mercy, pulling no punches as he rips apart facades and exposes the empty nature of modern-day government schooling. The book is very disheartening, but at the same time enlightening and liberating. As a former teacher, and a student as well of course, it really resonates and has made me seriously want to consider homeschooling my children. As Gatto explains so excellently, the school system is there not to provide your kids with an education, but to fill their heads with propaganda and turn them into obedient drones with no ability to think critically. That may sound like science fiction, something out of a George Orwell novel, but it's true, and I highly recommend this book to teachers, students, parents, and anyone connected to the educational system, which is pretty much all of us.